joining us now. Great to welcome, man. It's really a fascinating book about a case that took place back in 1927. Very interesting story. It's called Imbeciles, the Supreme Court, American Eugenics, and the Sterilization of Carrie Buck. We're joined today by the author, Adam Cohen, and he joined us from New York City today. And Adam, good to talk with you. How are you?
Oh, very good, and good to be here.
Yeah, good to have a chance to talk with you for a few minutes about the book. Now, I didn't know much about this. I've heard over the little I know about the Supreme Court, they've had some unusual cases, and I've heard in the past about sterilization and eugenics, but I didn't realize this particular story. What brought you to it at this time?
Well, when I was in law school, we didn't learn about this case, but we kind of knew it was out there. We knew that it was a bad case, and that there was this famous phrase in it where Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the decision, wrote that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And when I was thinking about writing a book about the Supreme Court, I thought, rather than just write about some of the good things they did, why not look at something very bad they did and try to figure out what we can learn from that? And this was in the back of my mind, and I knew that it was not well known, has not been written about that much. So I began diving into it, and it just turned out to be a completely fascinating case.
Yeah, the case 1927 Buck versus Bell, and the ruling made government sterilization of what they called undesirable citizens legal, which is hard to believe.
Yeah.
When you did the research on it, I guess everything, all legal cases are in law books, but was that your process, just doing the law books first and try and get the background on it?
Yeah, somewhat, but I actually went out into the field quite a bit, and there were extensive papers from one of my villains, Harry Laughlin, who was the expert witness who said that Carrie Buck was feeble-minded, and who wrote the model eugenic sterilization statute that other states used to write their own. So Harry Laughlin's papers are in Missouri, and then I went down to Virginia, where the lawyer who wrote the Virginia law and took the case up to the Supreme Court, his papers were there. I went to the courthouse in Virginia and looked at the actual records in the case. So I really tried to, sweep pretty widely looking into it.
Yeah, Carrie Buck was from Charlottesville, Virginia. Obviously had a very tough upbringing, raised by a foster family, raped by her foster mother's nephew, and declared, I guess the term they used at that time, feeble-minded, right? And then she was put in some kind of a home for those people at that time? Yeah,
they called it the Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded, and they sent her away even though she was not epileptic and not feeble-minded. The justice system was not very precise back then, and her family, foster family, wanted to get rid of her. They got her declared to be epileptic and feeble-minded, and she became an inmate. She was locked away, and then as soon as she got there, Virginia had just passed a law allowing for eugenic sterilization, and the superintendent of the colony decided that Carrie Buck should be the first woman in Virginia sterilized under it. So her life was just one series of bad events after the next.
Now, what brought her case ultimately to the Supreme Court? Did somebody say this isn't right, or how did that begin?
Oh, so they really wanted to test the Virginia law. Virginia, unlike some states, did not want to start sterilizing people until they could show that the law was constitutional. Their lawyer wanted them to go that way. So they created a test case. They decided, we're going to choose Carrie Buck, we're going to get an order to sterilize her, we're going to give her a lawyer and have that lawyer bring the case all the way up to the Supreme Court. So this was all an engineered case. And the lawyer was actually looking out for the colony of epileptic and feeble-minded, not for Carrie. And it seemed clear from the briefs that he wrote that he wanted to see her sterilized. So that was the way it went up there. It was really the colony trying to get the ruling they wanted, holding that their law was constitutional, and they got it.
In other words, it wasn't somebody against it, they just wanted to make it where it was officially declared legal, right, or by the Supreme Court.
Yeah. So it was all kind of like it was really a setup, and there was no one involved who really, really wanted Carrie not to be sterilized. So her interests were not being looked after.
Yeah. And again, the thought was at the time, if some people like that, they shouldn't have kids and perpetuate more people like that. Wasn't that the thought?
Yes, they shouldn't bring down the race, and they shouldn't, weaken the gene pool. So that's exactly what they were doing. They were choosing the people they thought were unfit and trying to stop them from adding, new generations to the gene pool. It was, it was pseudoscience, and it really, it was really not true.
And the Supreme Court at that time, which, excuse me, I'd heard it. I guess I didn't pay attention that day in history class, but William Howard Taft was on the Supreme Court at that point, right? Former president.
Yeah, very unusual. Former president was the Chief Justice, and then Louis Brandeis, who's one of the great progressive heroes, was one of the justices, and then the great Oliver Wendell Holmes. So she had a very prestigious and respected court hearing her case, but they did, of course, absolutely the wrong thing.
And 8-1 was the decision, right, at that point?
Absolutely. Only one dissenting justice, the one Catholic member of the court who did not write his own opinion, but everyone else was happy to sign on to this really terrible decision, which, as I say, was not just about sterilizing Carrie Buck, but was about encouraging the nation to do more sterilization.
Obviously, in 1927, really just newspapers at the time to report on this. Were there stories written in the paper about this, or was it kind of not really paid much attention to at the time?
No, there were stories. There were stories about the decision that, were largely favorable. By and large, people supported sterilization. The elites supported sterilization. And the main group that opposed it was Catholics. And some of the Catholic press was troubled by the ruling. But there were a few other scattered negative reports, but in general, people thought that this was the correct thing to do back then.
You point out in the book, this is still the law in many states, right? I don't know how many, but several states it's still legal, right? If they wanted to do this.
Well, yeah, I mean, the big problem is that that Buck versus Bell, the Supreme Court decision has not been overruled. So because of that, that's still the law. So there isn't so much, eugenic sterilization laws in place in the states right now, but it's more that if they start to do it, the Supreme Court, which we'd like to think would stop it, under current law would not. So so we don't really know exactly where our country's headed these days. Boy, it's kind of crazy times. But if people decide, to start setting up eugenic programs, and the science is going to make it much easier as we have all these developments with human embryo editing and so forth. We'd like to think the Supreme Court would stop it, but in fact, right now, under Buck v. Bell, a lot of this would be constitutional.
Yeah, the precedent was set, right? And very difficult to overturn a precedent, no matter how bad the law may be, right?
We'd like to see it in this case. We'd like to see it.
Yeah. Well, it's really fascinating. We just touched on some of the main points of it, but you go into real great detail in the book about it, and I guess you get to know these characters quite well. Maybe not characters is the right word, but real people right well, but by your research on it, right? Did you find anything surprising in researching all these people?
So many surprising things. Yeah, so many. I mean, first of all, how terrible I think Oliver Wendell Holmes was. And I think that was maybe the biggest shock, is that this is a man who was so revered, is revered in our country, was a Civil War hero, was a Harvard law professor, wrote these famous books about the law, was actually in many ways a terrible guy, wrote some decisions that really were horrible, like not letting black people vote in Alabama, all kinds of terrible things. And then now, in Buck versus Bell, writes one of the worst decisions in American history. So that story about just how much worse Holmes was than his reputation was, I think, the big surprise of working on this.
Yeah. Well, the name of the book is called Imbeciles, the Supreme Court, American Eugenics, and the Sterilization of Carrie Buck. We've been joined by Adam Cohen today. Adam, you have a website you want to direct people to, get more information on the book?
Well, I mean, they can certainly go to the Amazon or Barnes & Noble websites or the Penguin website. I do have one, adamcohenauthor.com, so any of those would have more information.
Great. And, of course, we'll be having more stories written about the Supreme Court as they'll name a new justice sometime. We don't know when, but it always seems to be in the news, right?
It'll be a big year for it, absolutely.
Yeah. Adam, pleasure talking to you. Thanks for joining us. We hope we do it again.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
I'm Stan Brock. 30 years ago, I formed Remote Area Medical to help people overseas. But then we found generations of families in America isolated by poverty from the health care they need. Together, we can take dental, vision, and medical help to 1 million adults and their kids, right here at home in the United States of America.
you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at DougMilesMedia.com. This has been a presentation of Doug Miles Media, all rights reserved. You can listen to or download previous programs at iTunes, Stitcher.com, or Doug Miles Media.